Hello, and welcome back to Inspire Resource LLC's The Cost of Telling Your Story. I am your host, Felicia Kelly Brookins, award winning Christian fiction author and screenwriter. And as we have been talking about previously, we are talking about the cost of telling your story as aspiring authors. And we also were talking about incorporating what it is like for the mothers of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony to have to tell their story publicly. Because even though they're telling it verbally and they're on social media and on television, you as an aspiring author also have a cost to consider when telling your story that you're writing that's going to be published and is going to be introduced to the world. And so we are going to go ahead and jump into part 3 of cost of telling your story. I will begin by saying that the question is not only whether these mothers are ready to speak, the mothers of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony, but the deeper question is whether they have been prepared for what speaking may cost them. And that is the same question to you as the aspiring author. Are you ready? Are you prepared for what speaking and talking about your story and writing about your truth may cost you? When a tragedy involves a son or a family member, maybe it was you or a community, the courts, social media, and public opinion, your story no longer belongs to you at that point. And in the case of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony, their story now no longer belongs just to their mother or their father or their family. It belongs now or is in the atmosphere for everyone to have access to. The moment that those mothers speak, their grief becomes visible. Okay? Their words become searchable. Their pain becomes shareable. And the same is true for you as an aspiring author. And those are things that you have to consider and think about when you think about the cost of telling your story. Their motherhood becomes analyzed by people who don't even know their child. You know, they don't know their family. They don't know their fears. They don't know the frustrations. They don't know really the full weight of what those mothers are carrying as they have to step out and share their stories. You, as an aspiring author, are in the same space. When you want to write your story and tell your truth, nobody knows the weight that you're carrying to be able to do that. They don't know about your family. They don't know what your fears or anxieties are about putting your truth out in front of the entire world to see. So, right now, these mothers know that they need to speak. They know that they have to be a voice for their children. And they may know that they need to stand up for their sons and explain their pain. You know, they may have to at some point defend their families. They may have to ask for compassion or simply say, this is what we're living through. This is what we are going through. But what they may not fully understand or know yet is how high the price can be when a private tragedy becomes public conversation. You, as an aspiring author, have to think about what is going to be the price or how high is that price going to be when my private tragedy becomes public conversation. Again, they may be getting on TV shows and they're on social media. You are writing your book, but it's the same thing, the same cost that you need to count. Now, we talked about it earlier. You can't just prepare statements. You emotionally and mentally need to be ready. You need to consider your family's privacy and safety, okay? Because you're not preparing to live part of your grief in front of people who may not handle it with care. We talked about that earlier. Okay. They have to prepare for that. You have to prepare for that as an aspiring author writing your story. These mothers are preparing, the best that they can for strangers to question their tone, to question their tears and their sadness, to question their words, their silence. They may even question their faith, their parenting, their emotions, and most of all, they are questioning their sons. And so think about that. You think about that as an aspiring author. When you're thinking about writing your story, you have to prepare for people to question those very same things. Are you ready for that? Are you prepared to pay that cost to tell your truth? These mothers of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony, they're preparing to tell a story while still trying to survive the story. What if that was you? Are you in that place? Are you still in the process of trying to survive your story, but knowing that you want to one day share this with the world? And that's where they are. And I may not have said it earlier, but the reason I'm doing this is because I've seen so much out there on social media and in the news outlets and different media types that I wanted to just, as a mother, think about them, but also as an author strategist and storytelling strategist, to think about what that is like for the aspiring author, for the person that wants to tell their truth, wants to write their memoir. What is that like? And so there's not a big difference in that when it comes down to the things that you have to cost, the things that you have to pay, as the cost in order to do that. Next, I want to also add that let's think about this. Before any mother, especially a mother of color, is pushed into the public eye, she has usually maybe time to consider not only what needs to be said, but what must be protected. So think about it. These two mothers. They haven't had a lot of time, but quickly they've had to consider not only what needs to be said, but what must be protected. You too, as an aspiring author, someone wanting to write their memoirs and tell their truth, has to consider not only what needs to be said, but what must be protected. Did you get that? You need to consider what needs to be said, but also what needs to be protected when you're writing your story. That is a crucial point. And so that is why we're talking about part 3 today of the cost of telling your story. We're going to talk about the impact of social media exposure because it is everywhere. It's like AI now. You tell your personal story, your private story, your truth, you have to be prepared. You have to count the cost before you do it. Now, I want to also add, when it comes to the mothers of these young men, that they have had to turn their grief into a debate. If you're writing a story that is emotionally extremely difficult for you, are you prepared for the fact that your pain and your grief is going to become a debate with some people? Are you ready for that? Strangers may twist their words, they may attack their character, they make assumptions about them, they make assumptions about their sons, and they can use their pain for content. Isn't that something? So I ask you again, as an aspiring author, are you ready for those things? Are you ready for people to take your words, your content, and use them for pain? Are you ready to them to make assumptions about you or about where you come from or your family members or your community Are you ready for that? You have to think about that as you're writing your truth. These mothers have to decide whether they'll read certain comments on social media, who's going to manage those comments, and how they're going to protect their peace from people who are not grieving with them. You too may find yourself in that same situation when it comes to telling your story. Are you prepared to not always respond to a social media post, something that may be negative or, some assumption that's put out there? Are you ready? Do you understand that you have to protect your peace from people who are not, sad about what happened to you, who don't have compassion, who don't show, compassion or concern or sincerity about what has occurred to you, who just simply don't care about what your truth is? Are you prepared for that when it comes to social media exposure? I have 5 tips that I want to share with you that I think may be helpful to you as an aspiring author trying to get their truth out there and preparing themselves to count the cost of what it's going to take to put your truth out there, to put it in book form. Number one, decide what part of the story belongs to the public. We talked about this a little bit in part 2. We touched on it. Every part of your pain doesn't have to be public property. And the same is true for the mothers who are telling their stories now, the mothers of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony. Every part of their story doesn't belong to us. We don't have to know every single detail about their son and their lives. It doesn't belong to us. A mother speaking about her son does not owe a group of strangers on social media every detail of his life, and neither do you as an aspiring author. As an author writing about survival, you do not owe readers every private wound that you've got. A family living through tragedy doesn't owe social media access to every conversation, to every mistake, to every relationship, or even a painful memory. You do not owe that to social media. You do not have to put that out publicly. Before you post or publish or speak, you should ask yourself, what part of this story needs to be shared for what purpose? And what part needs to remain protected for your peace, for your mental and emotional peace? Again, we talked about this a little bit in parts 1 and 2 of the cost of telling your story. Aspiring authors need to understand that being transparent doesn't mean being emotionally exposed without boundaries. Again, we even mentioned that earlier in part 2. Boundaries are not being disrespectful. Boundaries are important to protect the author. Boundaries are important to protect the parents of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony as they tell their story, their truths. Boundaries are needed. Aspiring authors need to understand that being transparent does not mean being emotionally exposed. Okay? Aspiring authors, you being transparent does not mean that you need to be emotionally exposed without your boundaries. Make sure that you write that one down, okay? Now, you can tell the truth without the public knowing every single thing, okay? It's okay. You don't owe them every single part of your life or your experience just because you wrote a book. You don't. Tip number 2, prepare for your words to be misunderstood. Whew, on that one, I probably need to take a little drink. I'm sure these mothers of these teens have experienced this several times already. You can see it yourself if you look at some of the posts that are on social media as these families talk about this tragedy. Are you, as the author that wants to tell their truth and their experience, prepared for that? Are you prepared for people to misunderstand your words? Because this is going to be one of the hardest costs of telling your story. You may be telling it from grief. People may hear your guilt. You may speak from love. People might call it denial. You may speak from pain. People could say you are putting on an act or performing. They may even be saying that now about the mothers of these poor boys. You may speak from truth, and people can take that and twist it into something that you never even meant. Are you prepared for that as the aspiring author? Are you? Think about that. That's another cost that you've got to consider as you prepare to tell your truth. Are you prepared for your words to be misunderstood on social media to the whole wide world? Social media doesn't always listen for context, okay? They're not looking for context of your story. They listen for clips, they listen for reactions, and they listen for drama and controversy, okay? Clips, reactions, drama, and controversy. That's what social media looks for. Even with these mothers and families sharing their story right now, trust. And if you read the comments, you'll see it for yourself. People are reacting and commenting to those reactions and commenting to certain clips based on what has happened with these two families. And they're going to do the same thing with you as the aspiring author. So you have to ask yourself if you are ready for that. So before you speak, prepare your message with clarity. It may help, it may not, but you have to be prepared for that, to know that you may face that. Don't ramble when you're upset or emotional or trying to respond to somebody's post, because we already talked about every post doesn't need to be responded to. If that issue is sensitive, maybe you need to write it all out or talk it all out before you even say anything to anyone else. Make sure your words reflect what you truly mean, not just what you feel in the moment, okay? And sometimes, even with that, it's not going to make a difference. Social media, they are still, the people in that world, they are still going to say what they want to say. They're still going to call your love denial, your pain a performance. They're still going to call your grief something other than grief. They're going to probably say you're trying to just get attention. Are you ready for that? I'm sure that's something that the mothers of these young boys have to face every day, every time they get on social media or some type of media, television, radio. They have to face that. And for you as an author, this really matters because your story, is going to not only be told before audiences face to face, but you're going to be putting out things and exposing people to your story and your book when you are online. You all give me just a moment. A lot of times I like to listen to music, and so seems like it just popped on. But anyway, we'll keep moving. Again, as authors, people may interpret your healing through your own wounds, okay? So make sure that you are intentional in your writing. Be careful with the language that you use, because it may make a huge difference, or it does make a huge difference, in how you tell your story, what you're using it for. But again, let's travel back a little bit. Keep in mind that no matter how hard you try, how clear you try to be, and how intentional, you cannot control what people are going to say on social media and how they are going to perceive it. Okay? Tip number 3, assign someone else to monitor your comments. And we just talked about that in part 2. This is extremely important. You, again, don't have to read everything that people say about your pain. These mothers are grieving. They're defending, they're processing, and they're trying to speak publicly about their sons. They shouldn't be reading every cruel comment because those comments can damage them emotionally and mentally. The same is true for you as authors. When you publish your story, those deeply personal stories, again, as we said earlier, don't read every single comment and don't comment. Some of those social media comments can reopen your trauma. They can make you question yourself, question about writing your book. They can pull you into arguments with people that you don't even know, people that are reading just to comment and not to understand what you're saying. They're reading your comments, because they want to judge you. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to pay that cost when you're writing your story? So before you post or publish something that is private or sensitive to you, think about how you're going to monitor that response. Or think about whether or not you're going to have someone in place to monitor and handle your social media for you. Will it be a family member, an assistant, a media personality, a counselor, a best friend? What? And again, we mentioned some of this earlier, but again, it is extremely important to count the cost of that when you're thinking about writing your story. Maybe someone else needs to screen your emails, your messages, your comments. They can determine what needs to be blocked or deleted or documented. Protecting your peace, aspiring authors, is not weakness. It is a strategy. And so that strategy has to include social media because that is part of the platform that you're going to be using to get visibility and to get the message out about your book and the platforms that are in your book. Okay? Tip number 4, do not let strangers become the jury over your story. You think that the mothers of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony have not had to deal with that, but they are not going to let them become the jury over their stories. You, as an aspiring author, wanting to tell your truth, shouldn't either. Okay? Because one of the dangers of social media is that strangers will try to put your life on trial. Okay. Strangers, people you may never meet, don't know, live in whole different states, will try to put your life on trial. They're doing it right now to the mothers of these 2 young boys that are having to share their tragic stories. These individuals that they don't know, and individuals you don't know when you tell your story, will try to decide who you are from one post or one speech or your book. They're going to try to judge those mothers' parenting and the father's parenting, the family and community based on an interview. They'll do the same to you. You may do an author interview, and strangers will try to decide who you are from that one interview. They'll try to define who you are from a headline. You think they haven't done that to the mothers that have had to tell this tragic story? They have tried, I'm sure, strangers have tried to define those women's son from one headline. They will try to decide those boys' entire life from one interview. In your case, it may be one chapter you've written of your true story in your book. People will decide about you and who you are from that. They will let one chapter or that book define your entire life. And so it is important that you remember that the comment section of social media is not the courtroom of your identity, okay? It's not who you are. Do I need to say that again? The courtroom, okay? The courtroom is not your life. The comment section of social media apps, social media is not the courtroom of your life, of who you are. And that is something too that I'm sure these boys' mothers are having to remember and be reminded of. What people say does not identify your son. What people say about you as an aspiring author telling your truth does not identify who you truly are. Now, also for aspiring authors, I need you to understand that this point is extremely critical. Okay? When you tell your story, some people may not understand your choices. They may question why you waited so long to tell your story or why you're telling it. Some may even ask, hey, why did you stay in this? Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you forgive? Or why did you, speak about this? Or why you even brought it up? Why you decide to name what happened, to tell what happened. But your healing doesn't need approval from strangers. If writing this book has helped you to heal, you don't need their approval. If healing before you wrote it or hit sin was what you needed and it helped you, you don't need approval from strangers for you to write and tell your truth and tell your story. Don't let people who don't know your pain become the final authority over your voice. That would be one of the things I would say if I could speak to the mothers of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony. Do not let people who don't know your pain become the final authority over your voice. Make sure you remember that. And number 5, have an emotional aftercare plan before your story goes public. In my discussion with Dr. Teresa A. Smith, we talked about just that. The importance in having an emotional aftercare plan. A lot of people, you prepare to post out there, you prepare to tell the world, okay, I wrote my story. You go on and do the social media video, you do the live, you make the clips, you get your book ready, you get ready for your interviews, but you do not prepare for what happens after that. And that is why I'm here as your author and storytelling strategist to help you prepare for that. Because once you've done those things, something is going to happen. In the case of these mothers that have had to come out and share their tragedy, things have happened. Did they really have time to prepare for that? No. They have their support system and they are going through it the very best way they can, telling their story. You, as an aspiring author, you have time now to think about your emotional aftercare plan before you hit send. Or if you've already hit send and submitted, it's not too late. You can still back up and come up with a plan to help you get through what's going to be thrown at you or coming at you face to face, virtually, or on social media for you telling your truth. Because you need to be prepared for what happens after those comments, after the criticism, after the questions, after the people have shared your stuff on social media, after they've taken screenshots, and after people start discussing your life as though it's a topic. Okay? You think the mothers of these 2 boys that are telling their stories and sharing their truth, that people aren't talking about their lives like it is the main topic of conversation at the dinner table? Are you prepared for that? Are you, as an author, prepared for that? For people to discuss your life and what they've read about you in your book and your experience as a topic. Ask yourself, who can you call after this post that you just read? Who's going to pray for you to give you strength and mental clarity and emotional clarity and strength? Who's the person that's going to check on you? Who's going to remind you why you told the story in the first place? Who is going to help you stay grounded when these comments become overwhelming, when people's points of views become overwhelming to you, when your family members' thoughts, mannerisms, and actions become overwhelming to you because you told a story that also exposed some things about them and they feel like, they have taken that on personally. Are you prepared for that? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself as an aspiring author. And finally, I want to say, for authors, all of this is especially important when you're writing your truth, your memoir, your testimony, your trauma-based fiction book, your family stories, stories that are talking about grief, your survival. You have to understand that you don't just have to have a plan of how you're going to get your book published. You have to have a protection plan in place for you when you write your book. You have to count the cost. As an author and a storytelling strategist, I truly believe that stories can heal, they can teach, they can wake people up, or as we like to say, make them woke, and they can also set people free. But I also believe that the storyteller must be protected. You are that storyteller. The storytellers, these mothers and fathers and family members and these community villages of these two young men, they too must be protected as they tell their truths and their experiences with these beautiful people. I just believe it is most important that you have a protection plan in place. Because, ladies and gentlemen, social media can make people forget that behind every public story, there is a human being. And that human being is still living with the consequences of their true story, of their experiences. They're still dealing with that. Even with the mothers of Nolan Wells and Carmelo Anthony, the families, they are still dealing with that, even as they come out and talk about it. And they too need a protection plan in place. It's important. So, aspiring authors, before you tell your story again, ask yourself questions. You know, have you decided yet what's going to stay private about that story? Have you decided that you're ready to take on what's going to happen on social media? Are you prepared for people to misunderstand you? Do you have a support system in place so that you can protect your peace while telling your truth? Because I totally support the fact and believe your story matters. Your voice matters. But you know what? Your mind, your peace, your family, your circle, and your healing matters too. Do you hear me, aspiring authors? Your mind, your peace, it matters. Your healing matters as well. I am Felicia Kelly Brookins, your author and storytelling strategist, and I love helping aspiring authors and writers to not only tell their stories, but to protect themselves as the storyteller. If you would like to connect with me, you can contact me at authorfeliciabrookins@gmail.com. If you're ready to tell your story, if you need a little help considering the cost before you do, you can reach out to me. And don't forget our tips that we discussed today as we talked about family, privacy, and safety. Remember, number one, decide what part of the story belongs to the public. What is it that you're going to share? Every pain point doesn't belong to them. Number two, prepare for your words to be misunderstood. It's one of the hardest parts of telling your story because even though you're speaking the truth, people can always twist things around and say something that you never meant to say. Number 3, assign someone else to monitor your comments on social media. That is going to be so important. You don't have to respond to it, you don't have to read it. Choose someone else or select someone else to do that for you so that social media doesn't cause you to reopen your trauma wounds. Number 4, do not let strangers become the jury over your story. Okay? These individuals that look at your post and read things about your book and post on social media, they may want to try to put your life on trial as that author of that book. They will be the ones that try to define your life, but don't let them do that. The comment section is not a courtroom, okay, for your identity. Remember that I said that. The social media post comment section is not a courtroom for your identity. And number 5, have an emotional aftercare plan before the story goes public. Again, in the process of preparing for your book launch, your video, your announcements, your interviews, make sure that you prepare for what can come next. That's the shares, that's the comments, that's the criticism, that's the questions. Be prepared for that and prepare yourself and ask yourself, who's in my corner when that happens? Am I ready? Who's going to be the person that I need to keep me grounded when these responses become overwhelming? Because again, you don't just need a publishing plan as an aspiring author. You need a protection plan. This is Felicia Kelly Brookins, and I'll be talking with you again real soon on the cost of telling your story.